Well, hello.
Good afternoon.
How are you? Not Aaron. Always a great day. That's the Renning shtick. Always a great day when this video comes on.
Heck yes.
It's somebody, a new friend in the clubhouse. So, Ron, I've seen the name so many times and we've interacted, but I haven't pronounced it. It's Strahan.
Well, actually, there's two pronunciations.
Oh, okay.
Driven by what side of the river in Scotland your part of the clan lived in, and so I answer to both. I grew up. It's pronounced Strawn. The CH is silent.
Oh, okay.
But in Scotland, you might hear Strachan.
Got it. Okay, wonderful. Well, so welcome to the show. Why don't you? We're talking about securing things that are not under our control necessarily, maybe through contracts or other mechanisms, but we'll get back to that. Go ahead and introduce yourself to
Sure.
the dozens of people that will watch, Ron.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. So I'm Ron Strawn. I've worked nearly exclusively in healthcare information technology for over 30 years. I was a sitting CIO for 26 and about a half years. In progressively more complex organizations, mostly nonprofit, but I've worked in for-profit side and have been responsible for the entire waterfront of IT, including IT security. And I'm now working as a senior healthcare IT advisor to companies like Overpower AI and others. So
Wonderful.
Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, really excited. And I think, that background of running the whole estate of IT, including security. I think you and we talked a little bit before this, but a lot of background and experience and war scars on,
lots of scar tissue.
Yeah, how to put together and then manage those relationships when people have to do things for us. So that'll be the topic today. Right after this. Here we go. Well, I often start with old man, get off my lawn kind of stories. I won't do that today. I'm sure we could both contribute some of those. Those might come later, but I'll at least introduce the premise for the conversation today. I think a lot of the things we talk about or have talked about on the show address the security of things that we directly control. And so we've talked about some of the basics in our series to start the year around the basic controls of CIS, and a lot of that presumes to implement those CIS basic controls. It assumes things that we control. So how would I control and secure a router, a server, a business application that I'm responsible for? And so I thought it'd be an important time to come back to the reality of the trends are moving away from that direction, I think, and seems clear they will continue to move and accelerate in that direction. And those trends are towards cloud, software as a service, managed services, things where we often don't have the sort of direct control to make security changes or even know what's under the hood, if you will, that security configuration and changes need to be applied to. So our topic of conversation today is maybe how to be secure when you're sort of actually out of control. And looking forward to that. Looking forward to that conversation with you today. So I want to start. We could break this up into different buckets, but I want to break up that universe of harder to control things, maybe into some buckets, and you can add more buckets if you think about it. But my first set of buckets is really around, there are smaller kinds of vendors, or even maybe they're not small, but there are vendors that we might have or partners that we work with where we have a little, we don't have total control. We are working with a vendor or through a contract with a partner, but we may not have control, but we at least have some leverage. We're working with the kind of organizations where, we may have some impact. And I want to talk about those first. We'll talk next. I think there are a category of vendors where we have very, very little leverage. We're, one of a million customers of those kinds of organizations, and we have to behave differently. But maybe let's start with, in situations where we do have leverage, maybe give some examples of what do you think that looks like, and what are you looking for, when you're working with a smaller vendor where you could put terms into a contract, where you can manage the relationship closely, where they might actually know you by name or know who you are.
Yeah, and the timing and the level of relationship are really keys, and as is the size of the deal, and what any company may or may not be willing to do. And first, it's to be able, if it's a new agreement, that's the best time to build in what your demands, expectations, requirements are for that business partner, and what they have to do and demonstrate. And hopefully more than just once a year, to show you that they are as secure as reasonably possible. And I've found that it's a lot easier to do it when you're doing a new deal.
Yeah.
And if
why do you think that is?
Well, and if you're prepared too. So if your requests are logical, laid out, clear, and easy to understand and reasonable, and follow some sort of framework, it's hard for them to push back and say, no, we're not going to do that. Right. And of course, if they really, they don't want anything to sully the deal, they're going to be much more flexible and willing to cooperate and follow, what you're asking for.
No money has changed hands, and the document of the agreement isn't in place yet, already setting out and laying out the inside the four corners of the document, like, well, here's what we agreed to, and why would we change, essentially.
And it's important, also at the start of the relationship, but also build in those touch points that are more than annually. I've always liked the quarterly business review, and include IT security as part of that QBR, right? And that way, that business partner knows that you're not asleep at the switch. You're not going to ignore it for, the next 11 months after you sign the deal. And it keeps it in the foreground. So I find that's a very effective tool.
Yeah, I like that point a lot, and I will echo it. I think I've lived in the IT operations and even, touching on CIO kind of world, before business applications world as well. I've lived exclusively in the security side of things. I think in the security side of things, those QBR meetings are seen as a chore sometimes, but I've also have worked a lot of incident response and security with different vendors, and find that the time to establish a relationship and know who the parties are and how escalation actually works and who you can call to get additional help when you need it at tense times. The best time to do that is not in the
It's
middle
not
of
in the crisis.
yeah, it's not in the middle of the crisis. So that's one way to
Yeah,
look at and think about QBRs is that, it's that opportunity to get relationships in place that will become important inevitably later on, when there is some sort of issue, and that it's easiest to ask for people to do things they may not completely want to do. It's easiest to ask when no money has changed hands yet.
Yes.
It's easier also to ask when there isn't a crisis, and it's easier to
Yep.
ask when it's a little thing I think people misunderstand about business partners. Sometimes it's treated. I find a lot of hostility for whatever reason in vendor relationships or negativity, but it's the old, you get more flies with honey kind of thing. People are humans and they want to do nice things for people they like.
That's right.
and they don't want to help people they don't like. So be a person that people like.
And it's furthering the concept of honey versus vinegar. It's being reasonable, it's being transparent, it's being high level of integrity and honesty, and treating your business partner representatives with respect. And I learned a long time ago in my career that because I had some bad examples, that treating your business partners poorly did not ever yield the results you were looking for.
You're never going to get the best pricing. You're
Oh my
never going to
gosh.
get the best terms. You're never going to, get good treatment when bad things happen. They're going to secretly be happy when bad things happen to you, even if it's, partially their fault. On those contract terms. So again, going back to under the assumption this is a small vendor, I've got a bunch of leverage on. Do you have some examples that could be security related or even other of specific? I have a little short list, but interested in your thoughts on any specific things that would be helpful to try to get into the four corners of a contract document or an agreement for security purposes.
Yeah, especially in the last, I'm going to say roughly 3 years, we've had success with getting terms in the business partner following construct of, for example, high trust, and that we've asked them to follow and demonstrate what they do to be compliant, if you will. And so in many companies, we're very amenable to doing that. Or if we named a specific framework and they said, well, we don't follow that, but here's what we do follow. And I would say 99 out of 100 times we're like that, we're good with that, because it was a industry standard that we understood that, okay, that's fine. We can deal with that.
So, digging into that a little bit, you and I have the healthcare organization background in common. I found high trust, some people here may be familiar with or might not. And, high trust is a more sort of independent organization, and in healthcare in particular, but also financial services, high trust it's a very common framework. Part of why its adoption is limited, is strong in some industries and limited in other industries, I think comes down to it costs money to go get your hands on the framework. You have to be a member to get your hands on the documentation, and you have to have somebody. It's a little like PCI, and that you really should have somebody, pay somebody to assess you. But having said all that, I like that concept a lot from the standpoint of, even high trust, you can map it to other things. So
oh my gosh, yes, of course.
The various NIST frameworks or ISO or whatever, they're all the frameworks that are out there can be mapped to each other. And
I think the message is, pick a framework, but don't do a deal that's absent of any reference or commitment to a framework, because then you're really leaving yourself wide open.
Yeah. And I like that answer from the standpoint of the frameworks can provide coverage of sort of all the things that we should be, concerned about. And so if it's, I want an annual assessment and report. You don't have to do mine, maybe taking some pressure off of, I'm not going to audit you individually as a customer,
Right.
probably, but I want something coming from you that says you have been audited, you have followed one of those frameworks, and, some reasonable organization, your own third party has said, yeah, you're in pretty good conditions.
Yeah. And I
Anything
think,
else that
well, and I
you
think
look for in those agreements?
taking that thought a little bit further, what I think many organizations are seeing with the continuous high level of threat and events that's happening across all industries is that there are boards of directors taking more interest in organizations' preparedness and how diligent are they. And it's now being pushed all the way down to viewing their significant business partners and their preparedness too. So if there's let's just say a high dependency on specific business partners that provide good services, et cetera, to the core business, they're going to have to demonstrate all the way up to that board or compliance committee of a board of directors their preparedness and how they do that. Again, you're going to, if you have 10 companies you're going to do that with, you'll probably see them do it 10 different ways.
Yeah.
But getting them to commit to say, yeah, we'll demonstrate to you through our annual or quarterly or whatever the frequency, their audits, and using their framework, that they're willing to share that. And if you have to end up signing an NDA, coupling that so that way you're getting that information and their performance, and you're only going to use it within your organization and say, yeah, I'm not going to talk about this, I'm not going to leak it to the press, etc.,
Right.
then that's a good NDA to sign, in my opinion. So
Cool. Well, and that, to me, I think you've touched upon, those like periodic reports that I would get for, from key business partners in
right.
particular, the people that my business absolutely relies upon, kind of two things that I think branch out from there. One is SOC reports, which I want to come back to, but also, that this was I'm trying to remember, when I heard this for the first time, but, it wasn't, I don't think it was 10 years ago, it's in more recent years, but we talk about third party, these key people we rely on. We talk about them as, they're third parties that we're, that we have to pay attention to. And so people talk about third party, risk management or risk assessment, but it's also important, the transparency of getting those reports and understanding who our third parties are. So it sort of makes my head explode the first time I heard it, but being aware, maybe not in every single case, but being aware of fourth parties for us, that was the term of, know your key business vendor. You might need to know for those 10 vendors you talked about, either through conversation or even better, because it's built into those audit reporting, who are their key third parties, so that I have that sort of transparency. And I even can look and read and maybe have an official procedure for it, but even just informally know all of these vendors rely on the same, vendors for security, or no. I think about SolarWinds. There were people like, well, I don't use SolarWinds, or I don't use Kaseya, or a different piece of software.
And then look how quickly you find out that you were touched by it, even though you didn't have a primary or secondary or even tertiary relationship.
Yeah.
It's more out there in the quaternary. And it's like, oh, crud. Now I'm in it.
Yeah. This doesn't, and yet here I am. I still have malware in my environment, or I'm still reporting a breach, or those sorts of things, really what it comes back to. Yeah, I like the generalized requirement. I would throw in, just as the security practitioner, some of the things, more artisanal that I hope are in the SOC reports, the high trust reports, the, whatever whatever reporting and whatever relationship discussions I get from the vendors. But as I'm putting the contracts together, I'm also, some of the key things I'm thinking about remote access that the vendor might have into my environment. And with comes that, how are they going to get in to touch things inside, touch, manage, interact with things inside of our environment?
Right.
Try to make that as normal as possible, and even down to what kind of accounts are they going to use. And ideally, they'll follow our standards and norms for the tools, the processes that they're going to use to get into our environment, so that I know who's coming in, and I have the same controls that I would normally use around it. Notification, to the extent that there are human beings that get access into my systems, and to me it's rare that isn't the case anymore with almost everything we do coming down to systems. But notification about termination, we struggle with that sometimes inside of companies, but it's important to build it into contract terms and expectations that if you're my vendor or third party and you have employees that have access to my systems, you, just like my HR department has to tell me about that, you have to tell me about that.
Yeah, and to that point, a little bit of, I think the controls today are much better than they've ever been.
Yeah.
It's still not fail safe. It's still not foolproof. In the past, I've even included terms that if a business partner, if any of their employees or agents, et cetera, under the terms of the agreement and whatever they're providing, if they come in unapproved, unauthorized, and if they create any type of interruption, damage, et cetera, to spell out what the penalties are going to be.
Right.
And of course, like every good warning sign that's ever been created is because somebody actually did that, which is seen in the sign. This particular contract term, I had one business partner in the past, which they're almost completely exited healthcare IT now. They were habitual offenders, and it got to the point where we had an event that they caused an outage. We had to lock them out and then invoke the penalty. And after they had to pay the penalty, it really did get their attention.
Yeah.
And as draconian as that may sound, it's sometimes you have to go to extreme lengths to show a business partner that we're serious about this, that we need you to follow the process. We want you to do your job,
right,
and whatever you all are doing for us. But we also have to protect ourselves, and please follow the process and work with us.
Yeah.
And if it becomes too cumbersome, we'll work together to make it more effective. Right.
Yeah. And that's a key one of, I think in general general agreements that we've had like service level agreements and penalties, and that's existed for a long time. Right. People aren't always good about revisiting and enforcing those. And so that's always important, like when you do have those breach, going back to the SLAs and saying, no, really, I'm not kidding. Yeah. This happened. I do want that penalty. Usually that, in my experience, that usually looks like a rebate against, I'm not paying you for that month or whatever it said.
Yep.
But knowing how out of whack that a security breach can do damage way beyond the value of the contract that I have in place. I'm not a lawyer, but this, to me, it often gets into the indemnification portions of it, where it's even, that not a lawyer, not giving legal advice, but it gets into really conversations I find around, my vendors are not going to ever want to give me, they're certainly not ever going to want to give me more money than they got from me in the first place. And they're going to limit contracts around that. But I'm going to want to know, even, this would cause me for my top 10 vendors to know what liability insurance coverage do you have in place? What are the limits of that? So that I know, I may want to be indemnified. I may want money back up to that, not just even, oh, I only paid you $100,000 this year. So the $1 billion cybersecurity incident that you create, I can only get back the money that I already paid you. That's where you have to sort of, people that have high risk access into your systems, you gotta think about that sort of stuff. Along those lines, and this just one more, I could have a whole, I could probably spend an hour just giving, bullet point lists of things to put in. But one that's on my mind, because I've done a lot of incident response in my career here of late, timely incident notification. And that seems obvious, but why it's crazy important is we're living in this world where, especially if you're an organization, if you do business in multiple states and or in multiple countries, or if you cover multiple industries, you have all these varying requirements that you're going to have around when you have a breach, doing a notification. So if I just think about the state attorneys, every state in the United States has an attorney general, and each state has their own requirements of when this kind of thing happens, how quickly do I have to tell the state? And that can be, depending on the state, depending on the industry, might be measured in hours, not days, weeks, months. And then you layer on, if I'm the third party of some other organization, I may have my own, it's not like a legal, it's not like a regulatory requirement, but I may have contracts that require, when I have a breach, to tell other people quickly. So my third parties, you have to think and backtrack from that of, if I have a vendor who causes a breach in my environment, but I don't know about that. They know about that, of a hospital. I have somebody who processes, patient bills for me and bills on my behalf. And they have a breach that causes my customers' data to be lost, but they don't tell me about it for 30 days. I've already probably,
that's a problem.
I'm toast to that the Health and Human Services at a national level, the state attorneys general, like me saying, well, I'm sorry, my vendor didn't tell me, so I couldn't tell you. It's just not going to cut it.
No, I mean, ignorance is no defense, right?
Yeah, right. The clock didn't start ticking when I heard about it. The clock started ticking when my vendor was aware of it. And so I got to build, that's, to me, is really important to build in. And
it's incredibly important. I mean, you're right, because in one professional situation I had, one of the subsidiaries was subject to multi-state regulations. And when it came to notification, like you described, when it came to notification of any type of IT security breach or activity of any materiality, there was a requirement. And, that was part of the playbook, that we're like, okay, if this subsidiary is affected either within or from outside, that clock starts running and we've got to deliver notification, and here's what we're doing. And I think smart organizations will do exactly that. They'll have a playbook where they'll understand where those notifications have to happen, what's the timeline, and then crosswalk it against those third parties that are providing services and that could cause that type of interruption, and not fully rely on them to tell you, but keep an eye on what's happening. So, for example, there was a rather major event for a company that did time and attendance services, amongst other things. And it was pretty bad. That
company that's big in the healthcare industry, maybe.
Yeah, they are. They're known by 3 letters today. And it was pretty bad that many of their customers learned about I think it was a ransomware situation.
Yeah.
Learned about it from industry and not from them directly.
Yeah.
And oh gosh. So it happens. I mean, sometimes you sit back and think, oh gosh, this is never going to happen. They're going to notify us timely.
Yeah.
Not always.
Well, and that data breach notification is a bad part of it, but when you're processing, time and attendance, it's it's a cyber incident and a cyber impact, but it's also am I going to be able to pay people this Friday? And when I don't pay people, you play out the scenarios of, well, what happens if I'm not able to pay? That's pretty
That's right.
ugly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're running a little bit out of time, but I want to switch to the other bucket and say, okay, they're the things we have control and leverage. And then there are, let's, think about large cloud providers, or you and I worked in healthcare. There are some large, the vendors that everybody has one of those. If
Yep.
you're in hospital, it's the Cerners, McKessons, of the
Epic,
world. Epic. Yeah. Where I may have all sorts of theories about what they should put into contracts, but they don't need our business so much that they're going to move heaven and earth to and sign artisanal contracts to simply to get our business. So they want to stick with their boilerplate contracts a lot of times. Any recommendations or thoughts on, well, what do we do and how do we behave? And I truly don't have much leverage or control, in those situations.
Well, in that kind of a situation, again, if you do the best you can when it's a new contract, and you're going to have potentially gaps afterwards, and you manage to the gaps, what can you do? How can you, harden your environment against what they may or may not be doing, and especially data at rest, data in transition, and go on the defense, and then communicate that and what you have to do, because of course you're going to have to budget for it. You're going to have to ask for the money. You're going to have to demonstrate, here's what we're getting from company A, and this is the best we could get from them, and here is the coverage we have in the contracts, et cetera, et cetera. But from a practical standpoint, we need to do the following in order to protect our data, to protect our interests, et cetera, and then build the story that way.
Yeah. And that to me a little bit gets into, has overlap with another term that I didn't know maybe it didn't exist years ago, but doing business with like Amazon AWS has made me very, very much more familiar with CUECs, complementary user entity controls, which I think comes out of the SOC 1, SOC 2 language. But
right.
but these are the things, good Google, if you've never seen this before and aren't familiar, a good one would be to do a Google search for CUECs and add into that Google search the name of a cloud provider, maybe like Amazon AWS. And a lot of people either don't think about or don't realize that Amazon, for just as an example, and it's pretty similar across the other major large providers, have a mindset of all security is not their responsibility inside of their platform. So I've heard folks from Amazon describe it as, we are responsible for the security of the platform, and you are responsible, you, the customer, our customer, are responsible for security in the platform. Meaning there's some breaking line where, below the line, we take care of it and secure it, and we'll let you know if there's an issue under the terms on this PDF, this page over here on the internet somewhere. And then the CEUCs have this long list of things, like, you as a customer, like, this is on you. Of the don't set up usernames and passwords correctly, your issue. We provided you a server, didn't patch it well. And so I think, to me, the key there with those larger customers, and even this to me even gets into the Cerner Epic, large business applications. It might be Oracle platforms for other people in different industries, but it's are you spending any time reading those and understanding and thinking about, this lays out the stuff I'm supposed to do. Am I actually doing it?
Yeah. You got to understand what they're responsible for and not make any assumptions. And then once you understand that, then you know what you've got to do. Right.
Yeah.
But to assume that they've got it covered, don't.
Yeah. And it's funny you say that. I've seen that I'll, leave it nameless, but have had a firsthand experience with a large, kind of maybe second tier cloud provider, but a name that if I said everybody would know that name. But I've ran into a situation where there was an incident and it came down to, it was years into the contract where the customer realized, wait, I thought you, the cloud provider, were patching the servers. And cloud provider said, and that resulted in breach. Cloud provider said, no, go back and look at the agreements.
Yeah, if you go to paragraph 47, subsection 2I, it probably says it very clearly who's responsible.
The customer is responsible for. Yeah. And so it was but that was a learning event of who's responsible for what. So it's a big deal. Well, cool. Good discussion. Appreciate having you on as pinch hitting, and come back anytime. I'm sure we'll have you on again for a great discussion.
All right. I look forward to it, Brian.
Thanks, Ron. Take care.
All right. Bye.